Hello, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. I am your host, David Orlofsky. I wanted to try a new opening. That's how Chris Wallace used to start with Fox News Sunday, so I thought, see how that would go over. And a shout out to our friends over at Torah Anytime, or wherever you watch or listen to your podcast. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment. And we have a sponsor this week. And this sponsor is anonymous. I have wanted to sponsor an episode for so long. After listening to the recent podcast where you referenced the song, How Can I Miss You When You Won't Go Away? I decided that the time has finally come. I guess that's a universal sort of a thought. Always on the lookout for the most hilarious country songs ever, I cannot even begin to tell you how elated I was to learn of this one. I didn't know that country music ever made anyone elated. I was to learn of this one. Even my father hadn't heard of it, and I grew up in South Carolina. I think it even tops You're the Reason Our Kids Are Ugly, and All My Exes Live in Texas. You know, when I spoke in Cincinnati once. So I was doing my wife do mitzvos, and they took as a topic, apparently a name of another song, Are There Cheeseburgers in Heaven? Your shiurim have enriched my life so much from the first time I heard you at Neve 25 years ago, to the downloads I purchased on your website, to the free podcasts I listened to today. Your words have helped me get through some incredibly difficult times of my life. I've emailed you in the past to thank you, and you kindly responded thanking me for the chizik, which of course is chizik in and of itself. Just a quick note, I was not being nice. It really takes a lot of chizik, because you may have noticed this sometimes when I have guests on, people who are not as experienced a broadcaster as myself, and they just sort of like freeze up. That's even with me coaching them, because there's something about sitting in a room by yourself, just talking to a camera, and you have to picture, you know, the thousands of people who are listening. It's really very difficult. So when someone tells me, wow, I really enjoy this, or I got meaning out of it, it does give me chizik. I was not being nice. I've been accused of many things, not that. May you and your family be blessed, and may Hashem grant you health, happiness, nachas, and the strength to keep all of us. Amen. It does take koyach. And now maybe I'll pick up my old guitar and relearn the classic long neck bottle, Let Go of My Hand. Thank you. I appreciate that, because I when I used to run NCSY in Long Island, I had a special relationship with the southern region. And I found that, you know, that I felt a certain affinity. It's interesting. There are certain groups that people, not everybody relates to. I know people say to me, you know, you spoke in England. How did you go over? I said, great. They said, oh, because a lot of Americans don't go over well there. I said, yeah, well, I have a somewhat quirky sense of humor, and I think, you know, English people can appreciate that. Yeah. And the same thing with down south, you know. I'm also apparently quite popular in the Hasidic community. I hear this from Hasidim all the time. There are a lot of Hasidim that listen to the podcast, and English may not necessarily be their first language. I had 3 Bachrim from the Bov of Yeshiva in Bat Yam who asked if they can come for a Suda, yeah? And their first language was Yiddish, but they listened to the podcast, you know. I just met an Israeli over Shabbos, and his wife is Israeli, and she says, oh, she listens to the podcast all the time. And I said, English, she understands English? She goes, enough to understand your English, yeah. So, and also I have a large following in the Swedish community, so it's, I really am a Renaissance man, you know. I really cross barriers. And that's ultimately one of the goals of this, as we've mentioned many times, is to give chizik and to bring Klal Yisrael together. You know, if everybody could find something they have in common, and that is people enjoy, hopefully, learning Torah in a fun and positive way, which brings me to the topic I want to discuss this week. Now, this is obviously the first Shabbos after Pesach. It's conveniently located, right? Because Pesach finished up here in Eretz Yisrael on Shabbos, and Chutz La'aretz Shabbos Sunday. So you have more or less a whole week to put your kitchen back together, get everything mesudar. Usually on Pesach, you just have to clear everything away. Now, a shout out to my Machatenista, Rebbetzin Kotkis, in Ramat Beit Shemesh. The first time we went to their house to meet, there is nothing on her counters, but like nothing. I don't know how anyone does that. So when we redid our kitchen, we have a mixer cabinet. So, okay, we're able to shtup the mix and a few other things in the mixer cabinet. But everywhere there's stuff. There's stuff everywhere. And that's why for Pesach, to be able to clear off the counters, which I kasha, and somebody had asked me, they're granite. Why do you kasha them? And I said, well, you can kasha granite. He goes, do you cover them? I said, sure. He says, well, why do you cover them? So the simple answer is that in Eretz Yisrael, that's the minhag, we kasha, we cover. But my answer is because I don't kasha very well and I don't cover very well. So I figure between the two of them, we'll hopefully be covered. But you have so much stuff to put away, And so you have, I have vases. I have to hide them someplace. I've got this air fryer that I just got. This thing is enormous. I've got my Shabbos urn. You got to put that someplace. I got a toaster. We have a sandwich maker. We have so many different things. We have one of those wooden blocks that are filled with knives that you can always use in case you think there's a murderer and you say, the butcher knife is missing. We have one of those just basically for the murder mystery. There's so many things that just on our counters. And so you have to put everything away, and then you never really find everything. When you go through, you start collecting different things and you go, oh, where did I put this? Where did I put that? And some things you just forget about, which means you probably never needed them in the first place, So that's it. So, next time I'm just going to bring in an archaeological student and say, go, see what you can find. Well, I can't find your toaster, but I did find some broken pottery from the 3rd century. I said, it's not from the 3rd century. It was from during Pesach. One of my glasses broke. But okay. Anyway, when people come to Eretz Yisrael, they go to these sites and they find broken pottery and they swipe it and they smuggle it. They think they're smuggling antiquities. In the ancient world, everybody used pottery. That was the disposable dishes of that time. And it all broke. So the country is littered with broken pottery. The fact that you picked up a shard of broken pottery is no different than if you went to America and you took a used plastic cup. They have no particular. Look, I found this ancient metal scribe. It's something metal. Let me see what does it say on it? It's got writing. It looks like Coca-Cola. But anyway, so you have a whole week to put your house back together and find everything that you hid in the kitchen. And then enough time to be able to make your schlitzel challah. All right. So I'll just, I got two things that I just have to deal with. We haven't been together for a while. So, I get a build up. Sometimes when we do week after week after week, I'm not sure what to talk about. When I get a lot of build up, then I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. So the first thing is there are here in Eretz Yisrael. I don't know if they have this in America. Here in Eretz Yisrael, they write on different products. Ne'efa achar Pesach. It was baked after Pesach. There was one year where Shmini Shel Pesach came out on Thursday. I went to the Makolet on Friday and I saw these different products. I said, that is impossible. There is no way they could have made all of this stuff in the amount of time that they had. Yeah. And I think all they really made were the labels, and they just went around slapping them on everything. I don't know. When I was a kid, growing up, after Pesach, we'd go to the A&P or some other Goyish supermarket, and we'd buy whatever we wanted. Okay, I understand here in Eretz Yisrael that's a little harder. There aren't so many Goyish places. But if we had to go to a Jewish place, they'd have a little star that they sold their chametz, and that was good enough for us. But not today. Today it's Nef Pesach. That doesn't bother me as much as when it comes to making the shlushel challah. People only want flour shenitchan achar haPesach. The flour had to have been ground after. By the way, just somebody told me. I said, look, what do you do with all the stuff that you sold if you're only able to sell the stuff nef achar Pesach? He goes, oh, we put it in the storeroom and take it out about a month later. Then nobody's looking anymore. So there are certain people who mamish actually check the code date of production to be able to find out when it was made, where, what, how, But okay, far be it from me to cast aspersions. Yeah, I don't keep gebrachs. Moshe Feinstein once told somebody, he kept inviting him over for a Suda. And the person kept making excuses. So Moshe says, what's the problem? Because I have gebrachs? He says, yeah. He goes, I can accommodate you. He says, yeah? He says, yeah, I'll get 2 other people and we'll be mater neder. We'll take away your vow. I have to translate now because I got a couple of emails recently from non-Jews who say they get a lot of chizuk, strength from watching this podcast. So I don't know if they're familiar with all of my, yeshivish terms that I throw around. So I'll do the yeshivish is a dialect, which is a combination of English, Hebrew, and Yiddish. It's a mixture of all three. Yeah. A linguistic potpourri. It's called Yeshiva Shirain. Anyway, that was a song from the Journeys album. Go and get a copy. So Moshe Feinstein didn't hold from it. My father-in-law learned and tells, and he asked his Rosh Hashiva, and he says, I don't understand. Either it is fully baked, in which case it can't become chametz, or it's not fully baked, in which case it's already chametz. So I don't see what the reason is, but okay. Anyway, I mentioned this in class once, and one of the girls, who obviously came from a family where they kept gebrachs, ratted on me. And at the next faculty Shabbaton, one of the speakers dedicated their entire speech to don't make fun of other people's minhagim. And then afterwards, I went up to give him yeshikayach, and he looks at me and he says, I meant you. Luckily, Rabbi Bullman Zatzal was there, and he says, he's confusing minhag with a hanhaga tova. and Rabbi Bullman, by the way, kept gebrachs. Anyway, but the idea being that people who want to keep not eat gebrachs on Pesach, people who only want their flour, fine. They make their ki challah. And this is supposed to be a minig that after Pesach, Shabbos after Pesach, we open up the door of Parnosa, which reminds me about opening up the door of Parnosa. We're out of sponsors. So those of you out there who have been thinking of sponsoring an episode, I don't know, maybe I mentioned a country song you appreciated. Maybe I made some pop reference. Maybe you like the fact that I mentioned Hasidim. Maybe you like the fact that I mentioned Sfardim. Maybe you mentioned the fact that I mentioned Yeshiva Shirain, whatever it is. We need sponsors to keep this going because I really don't make any money off of this. This is just to cover expenses. And so if you can, if you've been thinking about it, by all means, please, to be mefarsem Torah in Klal Yisrael. Because I get a lot of complaints when I don't put out an episode. And I could solve this problem easily if I, turn this into a pay-per-view kind of a site, where you have to sign up and pay money to be able to get to see the podcast. I would like not to do that, but if we can't keep this thing going, so I'm not a man of means. There is another fellow out there who has his own show, and he's quite wealthy, and he can pay for it himself. So that's very nice, but I'm not him. Anyway, Beseder. So just thought I'd throw that out. So anyway, so the key represents opening up the gates of Parnasa. There are 3 minhagim. This is really a Hasidic minhag as far as I can tell. I went to Litvish yeshivas. We were like super Litvish. For example, they didn't even do upsharing. They said, we don't do that, So I had 2 girls and when I had a boy. So I said, we're not going to do this whole upsharing thing. And my wife says, but it's so, she came from a, Hasidic background. She says, but it's so cute. I said, it's not my minhag. We're not going to do it. And then she said something to me that I could not respond to. She said, okay, you don't want to do an upsharing, that's fine. But nobody will play with our kid. And I said, okay, you win. That was my son Yaakov. So Kadosh Baruch Hu has a sense of humor, of course, as you know very well, since I am God's manifestation in this world. And he has a sense of humor. And so my next 2 boys that I got later, they didn't grow any hair until they were about 5. When I had to do their upsharing, it was like with tweezers and nail scissors. They were practically bald. And in fact, when Moshe Yehuda was little, he was smart kid. I remember one time, I don't know how old he was, a little kid, and he was eating a yogurt, and I said, we had fleischiks for supper. He says, yeah, but I'm just a little kid. And then he paused and he goes, 1 second, am I Gil Chinuch? I said, if you have to ask the question, then yes, you are Gil Chinuch. Because a kid who's not Gil Chinuch doesn't even know how to ask the question. But when he was 2, I was taking him to Gan, and he looked like a big kid, but he wasn't wearing a yarmulke. It didn't look like he had long hair, like a kid who's waiting for their upshare. And my grandchildren, when they go in for their upshare, and my gosh, they look like a Shimshon, you know what I mean? They're like a Nazir, their hair's coming down, So, so he's in the elevator, and the woman in the elevator says to him in Hebrew, goes, why don't you have a kippah? He goes, because I'm only 2, okay? So we never really did these things, but peer pressure as time goes on. The pressure comes in to keep up with the Schwartzes, and so we the whole Elam does the Shlisel Challah, so we do too. Now somebody wrote me and sent me an article once about how the source for the Ki Challah is really from Goyish sources, and we really shouldn't do it, etc., etc. And they said, why don't you speak about it? Then I saw an article in the Hamodia, which brought down all kinds of different Hasidic sources who say, yes, it is a Yiddish minhag, and it always has been. So I'm going to choose to go with the Hamodia on this one. I spoke about this, but of all the Jewish publications, I always find the Hamodia the most warm and fuzzy, So very positive paper. Anyway, so I used to write for the Hamodia. So just to full disclosure, I put my bias out there, But anyway, so okay, there are 3 ways to do this. One is to make a challah and stick it with a key. Yeah. So we make one challah that way. The other one is to make the challah in a shape of a key. This is not as easy as it sounds. An enormous amount of time and energy is spent on doing that. Yeah. And the third one is to bake your front door key into the challah. And this has led to a legend in the Orlofsky family, where there was one Shabbos after Pesach, and everybody was coming to us, and my daughter baked the shlushel challahs, and she was waiting for her husband had gone to the mikveh, and another one of my son-in-laws came to pick up the challahs, and he's knocking on the door, and the door is locked. And he says, I came to pick up the challahs, and bring them so they get there before Shabbos, So she says, well, my husband left and locked the door, He says, so why don't you open it up? She says, I don't have a key. I says, you don't have a key? He goes, it's baked in the challah. So think about that. Do not lock your door and then bake the key into your challah. Yeah. So I wonder if that's where the minhag of sending people a cake with a file in it in prison comes from, But if you happen to be the one who bites into the key, that's always an exciting experience. Anyway, so you have lots of time to make your shlushel challah and get everything ready. And we are starting the process of Sfiras Omer, getting ready to be Makabel Torah. Now, last year during these weeks, we dealt with some of the Memches Dvarim that is listed in the Brisa in Pirkei Avos. As I've mentioned before, Maseches Avos is only 5 prakim, 5 chapters. The 6th one is a collection of brises. It's not actually Mishnah. Hence, it's Pirkei Avos as opposed to Maseches Avos. And one of them is that Torah is acquired with 48 midos. And to list those midos, we went through some of them last year. So I want to focus on one of them right now, if I can. It's one of the first ones, and it gives us a very important approach to learning Torah and what we need to do in order to approach Matan Torah. Yeah, and it's very important. One of them is besimcha, with happiness. A lot of people are not happy when it comes to learning Torah. Full disclosure. And I think that is one of the greatest tragedies. I attribute this to the fact, I'll go off a little bit over here, and it's a little controversial, and I'm going to hide behind authority, which is what I like to do when I say controversial things. Rather than just say it myself, I would rather hide behind an authority. I heard this once upon a time, and I asked Rabbi Moshe Shapiro, and he confirmed it. People told me the Mussar movement is dead. He said yes. And he held that the last Baal Mussar was Rav Hutner. But, okay, other people contest that, give other names. Other people say it died before that, whatever it is. But the original Mussar movement, as was started by Yisroel Salanta and envisioned by him, how it should be and how it should go about, doesn't really exist anymore. Yeah. And the reason is because it is very hard to find an effective mashgiach. Because to be a good mashgiach, you have to be a psychologist. And it is very hard to find a good psychologist. Now, there may be psychotherapists out there who hear this and will be upset, But there will be a lot of patients who hear this and agree with me. It is very hard to be a good psychologist or therapist because there's only so much you can learn from books. There has to be a chush. You have to be able to understand it. Now, to be fair, this is true about all doctors who have to be diagnosticians. Yeah, including speech therapists. Anyway, yeah, if you have to be a diagnostician, it's not an easy thing to do because you need a chush to be able to figure it out. I've told this story in the past, I'm sure. But when we were in Far Rockaway, we were going to an old doctor, pediatrician, who had been there for many, many years and was very experienced and extremely opinionated. But, there are certain things you pick up with experience that there's just no other way to get, And he had that. He had a tremendous amount of experience, and especially if we were young parents, it's good to have somebody who has that kind of experience. He retired, and he sold his practice to a young doctor who did not get his degree in America. I got the impression he just really, really wanted to be a doctor. He couldn't get into an American medical school. I don't know if it was in Grenada or someplace else. I forgot where he got it from. And he was a very by-the-book kind of guy. So one of my kids got a hold, before they had child-proof caps, got a hold of some vitamins with iron. We didn't know how many they had. And this was Erev Shabbos, and put her in the hospital over Shabbos for iron binding therapy. Not one person in the hospital had ever heard of iron binding therapy. He just kept her there, did a blood test at night, another one in the morning, said, it's fine, you can go home. So it was just totally unnecessary. My second daughter, he put in the hospital for failure to thrive. And we explained to him that my wife was switching from nursing to bottles because she had gotten pregnant. And so it was, couldn't really nurse. And she wasn't taking so much of the bottles. And he said, no, she needs to be hospitalized and go through a series of tests, failure to thrive. Fine. Over the 2 days it took him to make the arrangements, we got to the hospital, they weighed her, she'd already gained 2 pounds. And everyone in the hospital was just like chuckling, failure to thrive, And he put his foot down and he said, if you don't trust me, then I can't be your doctor anymore, and etc. He was embarrassed. It was obviously not failure to thrive, And I said to my wife, I'm okay with that. And my wife, who likes to make people happy, was like, okay, we'll stay, etc. My next kid had herpangina. If you ever have a kid who has herpangina, well, you'll appreciate this story. It sores in their mouth, and they're just crying and crying. I took him to the doctor, and the doctor said, it's herpangina. There's really nothing you can do. That's what he said. I remember it. And the crying was terrible. I called up my pediatrician, who now was obviously an elderly fellow, woke him up in the middle of the night and said, my kid has herpangina. I don't know what to do. And he says, okay, I'll call in a prescription, for codeine. I said, how much do they give him? He says, it's not for him, it's for you. Take some and go to sleep. There's nothing you can do. So when I went back to the doctor, he said to me, well, did you give him the Maalox Benadryl solution? I said, Maalox Benadryl solution? You didn't say anything about that. He says, yeah. The Maalox makes it more comfortable, and the Benadryl, numbs it. He goes, I said, you never said that. He goes, oh, yes, I did. I said to my wife, this guy just lies. This is crazy. Well, my wife didn't want to move. When our fourth kid, Antinus Esther, we were in Big Purim Suda, wanted to put her in the hospital because she was 2 months old and had a fever and couldn't find anything wrong. He wanted to put her in the hospital. Immediately told my wife, go straight in the cab right to the hospital. So finally, after the fourth time, my wife was a little suspicious. And she called me up. I said, tell him we want a second opinion. And she says, all right, we're going to go get a second opinion. He goes, no, then you'll never come back. Then you'll never this. Then that, he went into a panic. Evidently, we weren't the first people to leave him. Yeah. So there was a new doctor who had just come to Far Rockaway, Dr. Lightman, who was from South Africa. He worked in the bush country. You know what I mean? He saw everything. And he examines my daughter. He says, I understand why he said to put her in the hospital. Because when a child 2 months or younger has a fever and you don't know why, you have to be afraid that it might be meningitis. But he obviously never saw meningitis because you can see that this kid does not have meningitis. He says, wait here for a while. I have a feeling it's an ear infection that you can't see yet. So we stayed there for a few hours, and he keeps checking him, and he says, I don't see it, but I'm pretty sure. So go home, and if the kid has any turn for the worse, go straight to the emergency room because I trust you. The fact that he knew it wasn't meningitis, that's it. The other guy was going by the book. 2 months old, there's no clear source of infection, has a fever. You have to be worried for meningitis. But a person who has a chush can figure out that's not what it is. An amazing thing. We had doctors here in Harnof, pediatricians, Dr. Matar and Dr. Shapiro, who were just the nicest people in the world. And very, very qualified. They had two different ways of doing it, Dr. Matar was very fast. And Dr. Shapiro used to take his time and be very careful and go with everything, Like I once brought 3 kids where we thought it was like ear infections, and he sat them all on the table and looked through the one ear, and then looked through the other ear and says, yeah, they're all fine. I think he was joking. One time I went there and I said, my wife says he has strep and I should get a prescription. He says, do you want me to look at him? I said, you can, but I'm not leaving here without a prescription. He goes, then I'll just write it for you. So one time I brought a kid. I got 11 kids, so I've seen a lot, And he says to me, yeah, it's fifth disease. I said, what? He says, fifth disease. I said, I never heard of fifth disease. He says, there were 4 basic childhood diseases: measles, German measles, mumps, and whooping cough, diphtheria, whatever it is. There's 4 basic ones. And then they found a 5th one. They didn't bother coming up with a name. They just called it fifth disease. And I thought, wow. So there's a chush. When it comes to understanding the workings of a person, to be able to understand what makes them tick. So a mashgiach was a psychologist who understood the workings of a person. Now a mashgiach is basically a policeman. That's his job. Takes attendance. He says to you, where were you yesterday? Where were you the other day? What happened? What this? They're not there to work with anybody. They're not there to help anybody. I had a situation of a kid who was in a very fine yeshiva, and he had been missing time, whatever it was. And so the mashgiach said he's throwing him out of yeshiva. So I called him up, see if I could intervene. And he said, look, there's nothing to talk about. He's missed this time and that time, etc., and this and that. So we're asking him to leave the yeshiva. I said, I don't understand. You're the mashgiach. That's your job. Your job is to understand every bacher and to figure out how to solve their problems. There's nothing you can do. I'm throwing him out. If you want, you can talk to the Rosh Yeshiva. I said, that's not the Rosh Yeshiva's job. The Rosh Yeshiva's job is to teach Torah. The job of the mashgiach is to understand the koiches of every Talmud and to help them understand where they're coming from and how to get into their koiches. The decision's already been made. I said, you're a mashgiach, like the Alta of Slobodka, like Reb Yeruchim, like Reb Leib Chasman. This is all you know how to do is throw somebody out of yeshiva? I said, in English, we have an expression, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem is a nail. You don't know how to do anything else besides throw people out of yeshiva? And he says, well, there's nothing I can do. That defines the Muslim movement today. That's what it's all about. Yeah? There's nothing I could do, throw you out of yeshiva. I'll give some schmoozing and say over a schmooze from this one, a schmooze from that one, you know what I mean? But basically, to understand the koiches of a person and get into it, very hard to do. So to find someone who's talented enough, and that's why same thing comes from therapists. I hate to say this, and apology to my, any therapists out there listening, but I often tell people, I said, if I can find a therapist who doesn't make the situation worse, he's worth his weight in gold. That's great. If he just goes in there and he doesn't make it worse, that's terrific. But to find someone who really understands a person, has that koyach, that's like a mashgiach. That's very hard to find. And that person is a gem if you can find somebody who actually knows how to do it. And that's why you have these people stay in therapy for years and they never make any progress. And, you have these people who deal with off the derech kids. They have no idea what to do with these kids. So they work with the parents. You're too giving, you're not giving enough. You're too controlling, you're not controlling enough. You're too this, you're too that. All they can do is come up with different ways to blame the parents because they don't know what to do with these kids. I spoke to one of these people, charged a lot of money, working for kids who are off the derech. I said, what's your success rate? It's very hard to tell. I said, no, I'll do it for you. When you're done, the kid doesn't have to wear a black hat, doesn't have to learn yeshiva, but he'll keep Shabbos, keep kosher, get married and have a job. That's all I'm asking for. What's your success rate? Let's just say that if instead of taking them to these people, you gave them a placebo, a little tic-tac, you'd have probably the same result, if not better. They don't know what they're doing. And they're charging families who are in pain all this money. It's terrible, just absolutely terrible. But I don't blame them because to have that ability to understand a person is very hard. The same thing is true about mechanchim. To find a truly talented mechanech, a very hard thing to do. Most teachers are average or below average. I'm speaking from personal experience. I have a lot of kids, and I've been in education for many years. And to find a truly talented mechanech, that's unbelievable. My son had one mechanech who was extremely talented. He happened to be a psychopath, if you could put that aside. He had a shita of daber b'limud. Everybody had to scream it out. Now, my son was a smart kid, but at that time he was shy. I think he's still kind of shy, but he wasn't going to shout it out in the class. He knew everything. He was learning. He was be'etzem a good rabbi, but he had this thing. You have to scream it out. And so we went to parent teacher. He goes, "Hu lo medaber b'limud." He doesn't yell with the other students. I said, but he gets hundreds on all his tests. He goes, "Ma ze matematika?" What is this? You think this is math? You just learn it. Torah is daber b'limud. You have to say it. The second parent teaches me. He says, "I've tried everything. Tzarich onesh. You have to start punishing him because he doesn't scream." When the next year came around, it was also a good Rebbe. They start learning, and everyone starts screaming, and he goes, whoa, what is this? What are you guys, crazy? He said, what do you mean? The Rebbe said, okay, that's not called daber b'limud, that's called screaming like a madman, talk normally. And my son was like, yes. So he was basically a good Rebbe, but he was a psychopath. But they've had some teachers who were just nightmares, I was on a panel once. I remember it was Rabbi Leff, it was Rabbi Brizak, it was Rabbi Foyer, and it was me. And Rabbi Zachariah Greenwald. I said, two Adam Gadol, Ad Ma'od, Rabbi Foyer and Rabbi Leff, two chinuch experts, Rabbi Brizak and Rabbi Greenwald, and me. I was the comic relief. I remember they asked the question, they said, what do you do if the teacher does something and the teacher is wrong? And everybody said the same thing. Well, you don't want to contradict the teacher and you don't want to this and that, etc. It could be you have the pshat of the Marsha and maybe he was going with the Maram, maybe all kinds of different things like that. Till it came to me and I said, it depends. I said, if they said a pshat in Tosfos and you had a different pshat in Tosfos, okay. But if they won't let your kid go to the bathroom until they actually wet themselves at their seat, and then they won't let them out to change, or if they embarrass the kid in front of the entire class, or if they smack their head against the wall, I'm not going to tell the kid, well, I'm sure the Rebbe was right. No, the rabbi or the Mora is a psychopath. Now I'm being extreme. It might be a sociopath. Yeah. And they should not be in teaching. I'm not going to justify it. Kids have a very keen sense of justice, and they know whether or not you're telling them the truth. And so when you see a teacher who does something terrible, I'm going to validate my son or daughter. So then everyone said, "Oh well, let me change my answer." Everybody thought the question was just, what if they said this pshat in Tosfos and you learned a different pshat in Tosfos, and say the Rebbe's wrong, No, it depends what they do. And so what can I tell you? My children have had teachers who were absolute nightmares. They don't belong in chinuch. It's terrible. And they've had along the way some extremely talented mechanchot. I've told this story before because this is one of my favorite stories. I have a daughter who's very smart, and she's very thoughtful, and she asks a lot of questions. Now, she's lucky. She has a father who does this for a living, answers questions. So she knows a lot more than the average kid, So when she was in 10th grade, she had a teacher who thought she was the Rosh Bahag. For those of you not familiar with the term, it's an abbreviation, Rabban Shokol B'nei Agoyla. Yeah, it means the Gadol Hador, the greatest of the generation. Anyway, and then she knew everything. Between her and her husband. She was at my husband said, and that knows everything. Unfortunately, she was not ready for a kid like this. And she would say things, and my daughter would ask questions. And she didn't know the answer, so she did what many untalented teachers do. She tried to bluff, but my daughter's too smart. And she kept saying, no, but that doesn't make sense because, no, but that... Until this woman who knows everything was stuck. So at the parent-teachers meeting, when you go to those parent-teachers meetings, you have to sit there and you're supposed to go in for just like 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And then you have these people who stay there for like 25 minutes, So my wife went and the teacher kept her there for 25 minutes. Everybody was angry at my wife. My wife didn't want to be there. And the teacher was just bitterly complaining how the daughter made her look bad. And she said, tell your daughter not to ask questions I don't know the answers to. So we told our daughter. So she sat there quietly in class. And after a week, the teacher called up and said, your daughter's not participating. So my daughter said I had to sit there in class and try to think of questions that were easier enough that she could answer. Do you understand how pathetic it is when the kid has to take care of the teacher? And this happens more often than not. I've had teachers call me up and start screaming about their kavod. When you're getting into a power battle with a 4th grade girl and you're worried about your kavod, where's my kavod? It's like you are a disaster. You are so pathetic. You want to show you're so strong by lording it over little kids? Come on. Get it together. So that's why a lot of kids don't have simchas limud Torah, because they don't have anyone who ever showed it to them. Yeah. I can think of 2 times in my life for sure. When I came to Yeshiva Gedola the first time, I was in Chavetz Chaim. Moshe Chait used to give shmuzin every week. He had been a professional rabbi, so he was an excellent speaker. And when he would speak, you would feel yourself physically lifted up off of the chair. He said things that were so, not just what he said, but the way he said it, that was uplifting. I'll add another one, Pesach Kron, when he speaks, well, he has you laughing, he has you crying, he has this, you walk out physically, I don't mean spiritually, physically elevated. And the other one I was thinking, I'm sure there are others, and I apologize to my rebbeim and speakers where I'm forgetting, but when I'd go to Rav Moshe Shapiro, and he would speak, and he gave across these ideas that were a wow. I would come out of a shira, assuming I understood what he was talking about. I wanted to make a bracha. Asher bocha abonu mikol hamim v'nasa lanu es Torah so. You gave us the Torah. Blessed are you, Hashem, that I have this delicious Torah. My friend Rabbi Rudman, who was on the show, he was teaching in the seminary, and he was saying over an idea from Moshe Shapiro, and one of the girls says, that is so cool. And he says, Torah is not cool. Torah is kadosh. Torah is, And when he told me over the story, I said, no, Torah is cool. It's a wow. And in fact, somebody asked Moshe Shapiro, how do you make people from today? What do you do? He says, Kabbalah. He doesn't mean deep Kabbalah. He means light Kabbalah, or the stuff that me and that seminary girl would call, that is so cool, where it's a wow. Me and Rabbi Rudman were both teaching in Discovery. They have this thing with the codes, where you count 49 letters and you come to this, and then it spells out something. You go this way, it's Donald Trump. That way it's J.D. Vance, and this way it's third term, whatever it is, and it spells out these things, People are like, wow, it's a wow, Anyway, I was giving a shiur. We were both teaching in the same yeshiva, besides teaching in Discovery. And I asked him for insights into Hanukkah. I was giving a shiur on Hanukkah. And he had written a parish on the Sfas Emes. And we were going deeper. And he says, you can take it deeper and deeper and deeper. I know this is a Rabbi Tatz line. Let's go a little deeper, yeah? And you take it deeper and deeper and deeper. And then he stops and looks at me and says, can you believe that people are impressed by the Torah codes? He says, Torah itself is so much more impressive when you see the beauty of Torah. Me and Rabbi Tatz were once, Or Sameach had us, on a lecture circuit. He would speak and I would speak. And about the fifth time that we were doing the same speech, so he went first. When I got up, I said, Rabbi Tatz, you don't have to stay for this. He says, no, it's my pleasure. I said, I've given the same speech already. He goes, no, I love hearing it. So I got up and I said, I'd like to acknowledge Rabbi Tatz being here and sitting through my speech. He's heard it already 5 times. I've heard his speech 5 times, but I still don't understand it. And I'm hoping eventually I will. Because one of his key phrases is, let's take this a little deeper, And that's where you meet people that go, wow, that was unbelievable. I said, what'd he say? I have no idea. It's a wow. When you have a Torah, that's a wow. When I was teaching in Derech, so there were 2 second-year shiurim. I was giving the lower one. There was a higher one. And I came in, and I was teaching Gemara. I happen to believe I'm a pretty effective Gemara teacher when I have the opportunity to do it correctly. And there's a lot of caveats to being successful in my particular method, but I can be successful. And there was this one fellow there from Australia, and he was leaving in January. He was only there for half a year because Australia is upside down, and so they think that was the end of the spring going into the summer, but really it's that's upside down. They don't know the difference. Anyway, so he was there for half a year. He was very good in shiur. He asked good questions. He followed. He prepared. It was unbelievable. And at the end of his 6 months, he's leaving, and I said, "We're going to really miss you." He goes, "Rabbi, I got to tell you the truth." He says, "I hate learning Gemara. I've always hated learning Gemara. And last year I hated learning Gemara. And I only agreed to come back, I told Ray Brickman, on condition that I don't have to learn Gemara." So on the first day, he says, "Look, we have a new Rebbe. Why don't you go to his shiur? try it out for 2 days. And he says to me, the first time I enjoyed learning Gemara. And if I had a Rebbe like you, I would have learned Gemara in high school too. I would have really gained it. It's not hard. It's not hard to get a Simchas HaTorah. We'll have to talk about it in more detail because I spent so much time on all of the topics. I didn't get to how you get a Simchas HaTorah. But the simplest thing is to get the wow. To be able to hear Torah that is exciting. When I was in Kollel, I wasn't anybody. I was a civilian, But I remember I asked the kasha at one time, something on the parsha. And one of the other guys, an old Avreich, Talmid Chacham, he says to me, "Oh, that's a David Orlofsky kasha." So I was like, "David Orlofsky?" I said, "What is that, like a klutz kasha?" A stupid question. He goes, "No. When you're yeshiva all day, you hear questions. And why, because, and how, and this, and question and answer, and question and answer. That's all you do all the time." He says, "But when you ask a question, the question bothers you. You have a way of setting up the question that you go, yeah." I have, when I used to give my Motzi Shabbos shir, in the old days, and sometimes I would just set up the question and people would start laughing. Because I was like, yeah, I never thought of that beforehand. It's like so obvious. It's got to be something where there's like a, yeah, wow. The question bothers you. You want to hear an answer. You're on the edge of your seat. I used to prepare like crazy. And sometimes I'd be giving over a shir I gave once and I'd be listening to the recording. And I set up the whole question. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a great question. I have no idea. And then I hear my answer and I'm like, wow, that's great. I wish I had thought of that. I had no recollection of ever having said it. So that's a very powerful thing. It's a powerful thing that if you can give over Torah, b'simcha. And so that's the goal of Torah. When we left Mitzrayim, we came to Marah. And we couldn't drink from the water because it was bitter. Sham sam loy choku mishpat. So he gave us some Torah to learn. Why? To sweeten the Torah. When we come to Har Sinai and we get Dvarim kosher kagidin, it's as bitter as some sort of bitter herb. But that's because we learned already the beauty of Torah. Now I'm willing to go down and do the hard work to make it happen. But that's only because I saw the beauty of Torah. When the chavrusas were preparing, I would go around to each chavrusa and I would say, how'd you learn this Rashi? And they would tell me whatever the upshot was. And I said, maybe Rashi means like this. They'd look at you and say, no, because I said, I don't know, we'll talk about it and share. And I would go to each one, whatever they learned, I gave the other side. I would just argue with them. So they would go like, yeah. I forgot who said it, but they said, the most important question is my question. I didn't want it to be my question. I wanted it to be their question, that they should work on it. I remember one time in Shira, we were learning, and I said, what does Rashi mean? This one said like this, this one said like that. I made a little fight between them, and we didn't resolve it. They said, who's right? I said, I don't know. I'm a very famous guy. I don't have time to prepare for this. You guys prepare. You have nothing to do in your life. I would be in the base measures the whole night preparing, but I would never tell them. I pretended like I just walked in. I had no idea what was going on. I put it all on them. So one time someone was in the shir when this happened, and someone said, why didn't you say he said like the Maharam and he said like the Pnei Yeshua? I said, why? So I can show him how smart I am. I'd rather say that was Steve and that was Bob, and that's what they thought. Because I want their Torah. I wanted them to give their answers, to be excited by the answer. So Simcha is a very important thing. And as we begin now the process of getting ready for Matan Torah, all of us should be working on our Simchas HaChayim and Simchas HaTorah. It's essential to be effective. And that's it for this episode. If you want to find out more about the show, you can go to my website, RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can ask a question. You can sign up for one of the online shiurim. You can sponsor an episode. Please, please, please. You can sponsor a question and answer. You can sponsor a Parsha and 5. We need to grease the wheels of this well-oiled machine in order to keep it rolling. And that's it for this time. Until next time, I am David Orlofsky, and this has been the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.